The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
I want to share a story with you that I heard goes back a few decades. It was a woman by the name of Ella Adler. And she and her husband, Yaakov, they suffered a terrible tragedy that no one should ever know. Their son, Michal, he passed away 7 weeks after his bar mitzvah. Shortly afterwards, on a Friday afternoon, Ella was at the Department of Motor Vehicles with her elder daughter. She took a number and she was told to wait. And as in most the Department of Motor Vehicles, that wait can be quite long. And she was told the wait will be about 2 hours. Instead of just sitting around doing nothing, she took out her siddur, she took out her prayer book, and she started to daven. She's got 2 hours to nothing to do, so she might as well daven to Hashem. She might as well pray. She reached the Amidah during the prayers where you stand upright in silence and in solitude, and she looks around for an emptier, quieter place. So she strolls down the hallway, and sure enough, she sees there's an empty room there. And she goes inside, and she starts saying the Amidah. Naturally, given the rawness of her tragedy and the vulnerability of her state, her prayers were filled with tears. She was crying. And as she's there in the middle of this empty room, a female employee of the DMV walks in the room, and she yells out, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here?" Now, Ella is in the middle of the Amidah. We don't speak in the middle of the Amidah. So she begins to point to the siddur and to her mouth to try to mimic that she can't talk because she's praying. That's what she's trying to do to this total stranger who works at the DMV. She's trying to indicate that I can't talk. But this only got this woman more enraged. "What are you showing me with your fingers, with your mouth, with this book? What are you doing in this office? Get out of here." She's in the middle of praying to God Almighty, and she's not allowed to step out of her place. She's supposed to stand literally at attention. You're talking to God. And she's trying to excuse herself to this employee with these hand motions, but the woman would have none of it. And in her fury, this DMV staffer grabs Mrs. Adler by her arm and literally and physically swung her across the room. And she landed against the wall. How many of us would lose our temper? How many of us would be looking for an attorney to file a lawsuit? You physically took a woman and tossed her across the room. But she didn't do either. In a calm voice, she said, "Why? Why did you do that to me?" And then her emotions took over, and she began crying. And she said, "You can't possibly know what I've gone through these past 2 months." And she began sobbing uncontrollably, telling this woman that she just lost her son. And she had other children at home, and all of them were going through a very difficult time. And she rarely had any time for herself to converse to God. So she was just utilizing the opportunity to recite her prayers in a quiet room. The woman still says, "Well, you don't have to pray here. Go pray somewhere else." And even then, she stayed calm. And she said, "I don't know what religion you follow, but I'm Jewish. And this is how we customarily pray to God." And then amidst her tears, she walked out of the office and she went back to the waiting area. 3 minutes later, this other woman walks out of her office, comes over to Mrs. Adler. She puts her arm around her and she says, "I'm so sorry. I am so ashamed. I don't know what's with me. I'm also Jewish. I beg you, please forgive me." And with that, they embraced and they cried together. And after wiping their tears, they had a serious conversation for several minutes more. Mrs. Adler finished her business at the DMV and left. The following week, Mrs. Adler attended a Torah study session, and after the class, she went to the rabbi to talk. And in the course of the conversation, she told him what happened at the DMV on Friday. So the rabbi says, "I think you should go back and continue a conversation with this woman. If divine providence put you together, even under the strangest of circumstances, maybe you should try to see where this conversation will lead, so go back." So the next day she went back to the DMV and she found the woman and she gave her a pamphlet on faith that she had written in the memory of her son. The woman was deeply touched and she said, "I want you to know something, Mrs. Adler. I want you to know that this past Friday night, the night of our meeting, I went to the synagogue for the first time in decades. I went to pour out my heart and to pray to God for forgiveness for my behavior to you. And then I prayed for the soul of your son. As ashamed as I am, I cannot begin to tell you what that encounter has done for me as a person and as a Jew. That's what it is, my friends. The woman could have responded in anger, and we all would agree that she would have been justified to do so. Instead, she took the words of King Solomon to heart. A soft answer turns away anger and awakens the goodness tucked beneath the hard shell of another human being.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org